Warning: the following video contains religious dogma, exposed catgirls, an overwhelming amount of existential dread, and spoilers to the Shadowbringers story. The Final Fantasy series is known for its confusing plots, complex histories, and absurd magics, which can lead to an overall mind-bending experience. But it always brings it back to one or two main villains to represent those themes. The best villains capture the player in the moment because they create conflict, but they're also relatable. From deranged clowns, hell-bent on revenge, to scientifically modified soldiers in the middle of an identity crisis, or nihilists who want to end suffering by ending existence.
Allow Kimahri to die and release him from his pain.
Sometimes, the fantasy goes a little bit hard to relate to. However, in Final Fantasy XIV, the main villains for the first overarching story are the Ascians. They're an ancient race of people who were highly gifted with magic, yet became extinct due to a cataclysmic event. However, several of them have remained for thousands of years in their spirit form, and they have a sinister plan to return to power. They can insert their souls into human bodies and use this ability to manipulate governments and other entities of power into conflicts with each other. While it may not be the easiest thing to relate to an ancient spirit, the way the story progresses in the Shadowbringers expansion leads to one of the most compelling villains ever written. While the Heavensward and Stormblood expansions had more emotional stories based in reality, Shadowbringers takes the fantasy to another level for a story that is more cerebral, more arcane. It requires quite a bit of thought to understand it, and challenges our preconceived notions and the values we prescribe to them. However, at the core of all this complexity is something so fundamental to understanding the human experience that it hits home more than any other story. It results in us questioning who is right and wrong, good and evil, and whether you would have done the same thing when put in their position. So in this video, I will explain how the Shadowbringers story sets up many different plot lines that all have their own separate conclusions, and how these conclusions and the characters involved in them will all contribute to a final realization about the villain, and therefore the nature of conflict, which helps them and us as the player to better prepare ourselves for future conflicts. But to understand why the villain story is so compelling, we need to understand the entire plot and how it primes us for the revelations that occur.
Difficult decisions lie ahead of you. Decisions best made with the benefit of knowledge to which only the eternal are privy.
The theme of Shadowbringers is obvious from the name and the opening trailer. We play as the Warrior of Light who wants to save the world and do what is right, and thus we are in conflict with those who are evil or would bring darkness to our world. For us to become the bringer of darkness would turn that entire dynamic on its head, which would serve as a shocking moment for anyone invested in the story up until that moment. So when the opening trailer shows an angelic figure fighting the Warrior of Light, we're a bit confused. But that's not the only thing that's surprising. The character Y'shtola is referred to as Matoya, which was her master's name, and Urianger uses cards to determine fate, showing that he swapped classes to an astrologian. Thancred also uses a gunblade when he used daggers before, and he refers to a child as Minfilia when we had previously thought Minfilia was dead. All of these main characters, our allies, have undergone some kind of change, which suggests that something meaningful happened to cause such a difference in each character. The trailer further intensifies these feelings of unrest when the Warrior of Light overcomes the Angel by embracing darkness and therefore becoming the Warrior of Darkness. I decided to play a Black Mage for this expansion, but it's clear that the Dark Knight is the class thematically represented here. I just wanted a magical version of that. There's plenty more meaning to unpack from this trailer, because it essentially foreshadows the entire events of the expansion. But the main point here is that all of our allies undergo some major changes, which represents their progression to better understand themselves and adapt to the world around them. It is through these shocking revelations, unclear solutions, and subverted expectations that we will question our beliefs on the moral dilemmas and philosophical problems that occur in this expansion. So we need to start from the beginning to get the full picture.
Come.
The expansion starts with all our allies in a coma. They lost control of their bodies suddenly, and we're also getting the same voices in our head telling us to throw wide the gates. This phrase is most commonly referred to in the Bible as opening oneself up to the presence of God by opening wide our gates of disbelief. But in Shadowbringers, this phrase is significant because if we're going to understand what's going on, we need to be open-minded to more than what is considered gospel or widely accepted as true. Our preconceived notions on particular topics can be thought of as gates, which prevent us from exploring new places or ideas. And when we open wide the gates, we're taken to an entirely new world with brand new places and ideas that we never imagined before. We awake in a place that we'll later learn is called Norvrant. The first man who speaks to us in Norvrant makes a joke about how it's night, but there is no night because it's bright out. This person has an uncanny appearance that is identical to someone we saw at the beginning of A Realm Reborn. It's the very first person we talk to after making our character in the game, except it's not exactly the same, but it's a parallel to A New Start. The situation is confusing because we recognize this person, but he's saying things that don't make sense. The sky is clearly bright, so it can't be night. Then he mentions it's been over 100 years since there's been a dark night. The scene does, however, introduce two important themes. The first is the main conflict of the expansion, that the balance between light and darkness has been shifted too far towards light such that there is no longer a night sky. As you can imagine, it would cause many difficulties such as inability to sleep and other complications that would occur with perpetual sunlight. Here is the first time we question our preconceived notion that light is good and darkness is bad. We later learn that this planet we've been summoned to is the first shard or reflection of the source, our home planet. There are 13 shards, and these reflections have similarities between them such as geography, laws of physics, and even souls of the people inhabiting these worlds. This first character we meet is meant to represent this similarity between the worlds. He tells us that we need to head to the Crystarium, so we follow his suggestion, but as we arrive at the gates, we're attacked by a monster which one of the guards dispatches. These monsters are called Sin Eaters, which is an important name to remember. As the Sin Eater dissipates, it leaves behind a ring which we saw on the finger of the guy we met out in the forest, suggesting he was just eaten by that monster. This scene also introduces the second theme of nature versus nurture. That is the conflict of deciding how much of our fate is decided by our nature, such as genetics, family, or birthplace, and how much our nurture, such as how hard we work, what kind of luck we encounter, and what people we meet can affect the path of our fate. When we meet this character in the source at the beginning of the game, he has a friendly attitude and our carriage is attacked by monsters, but guards protect us and we continue on. Now when we meet his reflection in the first, he has the same nature, tending towards friendliness and jokes. However, he meets a much different fate. The man is eaten by a Sin Eater before the guards can help him. One man of one nature lives on in the source, and another man of almost identical nature dies in the first. If the player remembers the original scene in the source, he tells us to try not to die. In a dark irony, this sets up the danger that this other world presents. We not only need to put more effort to survive in the first, but we need to rethink how we value each person's struggles that has survived it thus far. We then meet the Crystal Exarch at the gates to the Crystarium. His face is concealed, but he has a welcoming voice. He takes us back to the Crystal Tower, which is also surprisingly in this world. Then he reveals to us that it was he who summoned us to this world, and that we must help him to combat the overflow of light in this world. An overabundance of light and the flow of aether or magical energy can throw off the balance so much that it creates a calamity in another world. He explains that time works differently in this world, and that he summoned our allies here accidentally when trying to summon us, and they have since spread out on their own journeys to try to stop the flood of light. As we try to rejoin our allies one by one, we're going to explore each of the new areas and experience their stories that introduce ambiguity or essentially overturn our expectations or beliefs on particular topics. Each area has its own theme, which helps us to understand how different this world is, which helps to, as the Exarch said, throw wide the gates to other possibilities. The first place we travel to is Kalusha to meet up with Alphinaud, and despite the difference in flow of time in this world, he hasn't changed much. He's still a short Elysian that tries to speak too eloquently and cares too much about helping others. In fact, one of his main characteristics has been that he has an extremely idealistic view of morality. He wants to work towards a world where none must suffer, and our journey in this region is going to be an eye-opening experience for him and the player. Alphinaud catches us up on his plan to get into Eulmore, the main city of this region. It's a very selective city where few can enter, but many want access to this safe haven from the dangers of sin eaters and the harsh wastelands that have been flooded with light.
The only way the common folk can enter this perverted paradise is if they fulfill the whim of one of the privileged. And so they are picked over like market produce.
Those who do enter Eulmore are either slaves who must be determined to have a useful skill, or slave owners who live in complete luxury. We gain entry into Eulmore by pretending Alphinaud is an artist, and we are his assistant. To be fair, Alphinaud's drawings are very detailed, so I don't mind him stealing the protagonist's spotlight this time. Along the way, we meet different victims of this situation. One person had been thrown off the top of Eulmore into the ocean. Many live in poverty outside of Eulmore because the resources are funneled into the city, and another had a chunk of flesh removed as punishment for fraud. The theme here is of sin and innocence. There are clear biblical references, such as when Alphinaud says,
"A poor man could sooner pass through the eye of a needle than Eulmore's gates,"
which is a reference to the book of Matthew, which says, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is richer to enter the kingdom of God." This flips the dynamic on its head. Instead of the rich struggling to get into heaven, in Shadowbringers, the poor struggle to get into the paradise that is Eulmore. That's because the cost to get into heaven is virtue or repentance, and the cost to get into Eulmore is a lack of shame, a willingness to become a slave or to own slaves. There's also references to the epic poem by John Milton, Paradise Lost, which details the biblical story of the fall of man when Adam and Eve brought sin to mankind by eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, how Satan wished to undermine the hypocrisy of God, and how Adam was given a vision of the flood that would cleanse mankind. This reference is especially apparent in Final Fantasy XIV when a quest in Eulmore is named Paradise Fallen, and the lyrics in the Shadowbringers trailer say, "Far beyond this dream of a paradise lost," right as the Warrior of Light punches an angel in the face. The very next scene in the trailer is Y'shtola brandishing her weapon in front of a burning tree falling, and Thancred running up the stairs to escape Eulmore. All three of these scenes symbolize acts of defiance against God, which questions our ideas of sin and innocence.
This town certainly has changed, and not at all for the better.
When we reach the top of Eulmore with Alphinaud, we meet their perceived symbol of God and innocence, Vothri. At his throne, Vothri has sin eaters by his side, but they're not attacking anyone because he can control them. Their pure white appearance contrasts with the unsettling reality that these are the same creatures that had just killed a man. We also arrive in the middle of a trial where Vothri brutally punishes and humiliates one of the slaves. Here it becomes clear that this paradise is not as idealistic as Alphinaud would hope. Vothri exhibits most of the 7 deadly sins of greed, gluttony, envy, sloth, pride, wrath, and lust. Just looking at him, you can tell that he's a glutton. He greedily wants to own everything. His laziness or sloth is apparent as he sits on his throne and lets others do his work for him. He's prideful in asserting that only he can rule over Eulmore, and he claims that he is merciful, yet unleashes his cruel wrath on those who do not follow his rules.
Who gave you permission to tend to that criminal's wounds? I told you to paint me a picture!
What you need is a mirror, not a painting. It will capture the horror I see before me far better than I ever could.
The meaning of this mirror line hits deeper because of the fact that Alphinaud's paintings were already so realistic that the nobles of Eulmore found them unflattering. The scene invites us to question whether a paradise is worth it, and whether sin is truly bad. Is it better to live in a false paradise, or a harsh reality? In relation to all the biblical references, we wonder whether or not the fall of man that cast humanity out of the Garden of Eden and into a life of sin was better or worse for us. Vauthry is not the main villain here though. He's mostly a plot device. The real villainy comes from the Ascians, who haven't shown up too much yet. Later on we learn that Emet-Selch, one of the Ascians who had been manipulating the people of the First, helped to create Vauthry by convincing the former leader of Eulmore to infuse his wife's unborn child with a Sin Eater. That child could then take control of the Sin Eaters such that they can command power over the people. So why do Emet-Selch and the Ascians want to do this? Why do they want to keep creating chaos and conflict? They simply want to bring back their people who went extinct thousands of years ago. They believe that by upsetting the balance to create these magical calamities, that they can return the world back to the way it was when their people existed. It's not uncommon or unrelatable to be nostalgic for your past or to want to be reunited with your loved ones. This is what the vocals in the Shadowbringers trailer represent. The Paradise Lost lyric is in reference to the Ascians and their magical paradise that they lost. The chorus repetitively singing home at first appears to be said from the perspective of the Warrior of Light, who has been summoned to a strange land and just wants to solve the conflict so they can return home. But it's really the Ascians singing this line. They have been waiting thousands of years to return the world back to the way it was, even if it means killing all of the different worlds that were created from the source. This explains the detached cadence and deep resonating sound of these lyrics, which result in an ominous tone that better suits the villains of the story. This interpretation also leads to a direct comparison between the Warrior of Light and Emet-Selch. If we, the Warrior of Light, win, then we get to return home to our friends and family safely in the Source world. If Emet-Selch wins, then the calamity happens and we all die, but he and the Ascians can return to their home.
Well, it seems we're both eager to fulfill our duties then.
On that much, we are in agreement.
We want the same thing, but have conflicting methods of achieving it. Despite this fact, it's not easy to humanize a villain, and the comparisons are subtle, so the plot requires more shattered expectations to start really believing in it. Another area we visit in the story is Araeng, which is the land closest to the flood, where the light is its strongest and almost nothing can survive this desert wasteland. The theme of this area is life and death, because there are moments where the lines between the two are blurred. At first we meet Tesleen, a resident of the area who is almost immediately killed off by a Sin Eater in one of the most gruesome scenes of this expansion. She's reborn as a Sin Eater, and later on we need to fight Tesleen in her new form as a dungeon boss. Another Sin Eater. Oh, it's Tesleen! No! It's a shocking moment because we realize that every one of these Sin Eaters we've been killing were once human. After defeating Tesleen and the Light Warden, which is just the main Sin Eater that controls the area, we're able to absorb their light within us. However, while absorbing this light means that we can restore the balance and return the night sky to this area, there's only so much light you can absorb before becoming a Sin Eater. Yes, we can absorb more due to our power as the Warrior of Light, but there's a limit. Then we're visited by the ghost of Ardbert, who was the Warrior of Light in this world that caused the flood over 100 years ago. He had been manipulated by an Ascian who posed as Hydaelyn, speaking voices as she would to her Warriors of Light. This Ascian, pretending to be Hydaelyn, told Ardbert and his adventurers to vanquish the darkness of the First, then to sacrifice themselves so that they can travel worlds using Ascian magic to fix the imbalance of light by killing us, the Warrior of Light in the Source. Unlike before though, He's much more tame when he speaks to us this time, even confused.
A waste of time. This world is beyond saving, like those who try to save it. Muddled as my mind may be, I've not forgotten that.
Just like us, he wanted to do what was right, but things didn't go well. There's another parallel made here. Just like that first character with the ring, who died, was a reflection of another character in the source, Ardbert is our reflection in the first. He is or was the warrior of light in this world. However, nature and nurture once again leads to an unfavorable outcome for those in the first. All of these difficulties stem from the Ascian influences. So our expectations are once again subverted. A character who we thought was a villain is presented as more agreeable. It leads to questions such as, what if we had been in his shoes? Would our fate be the same? What if things had been slightly different? Would we even be alive? It emphasizes the fragility of life, but also the necessity of darkness to balance the light. These small revelations in the story keep adding up and will eventually lead to larger revelations later on. This moment is just opening the gates wider.
The founding father was an Ascian, and he created the Empire solely for the purpose of sowing the seeds of chaos.
The next area we visit is Mheg, the land of fairies in Norvrant. Here we speak with our allies Araeng and Thancred, who discuss this world's views. Araeng shares with us a chart of the magical elements that he found interesting, which is one very similar to a chart that exists throughout the source.
That's umbral light and astral darkness, yes? I'm no etherologist, but it strikes me that the nomenclature of the first is rooted in the generation of the two forces, while our own appears to focus on their effects. Which makes one wonder, have we had it backwards all this time?
Perhaps neither of the definitions are wrong, but are instead derived from their perspective. This is similar to how we view gravity on Earth from our perspective on Earth. Other planets have completely different gravitational pull due to their proximity to the sun and mass. We also know that time is slower on more massive planets due to a higher gravitational pull. It suggests that there is a possibility that the rules we know could be different, and that it's still possible to live under these conditions. When Thancred suggests that we could have been wrong the entire time, it's an eye-opening experience. We're feeling this uncertainty the entire time, but this is the first time it's said aloud. Is it possible that we are the bad guys? Even if it's not true, it's an important thing to consider. It further widens the gates such that we can understand the reality of the world beyond our perspective. As we'll continue to see, the writers will try to further open our minds to other possibilities, which will help to humanize the villains, but we're not quite there yet. The area of Mheg is also a reference to the Shakespearean play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. The names Titania and Puck are names used by the fairies in Mheg, and the same names are used by the fairies in A Midsummer Night's Dream. This Shakespearean play also attempts to shake up the way we think about the world. In particular, it invited us to think about the chaotic potential of love and the uncertainty of gender due to how the fairies use their magic and illusions to influence the main characters of that story to engage in different relationships. The fairies in Shadowbringers play tricks on the humans and make gender more ambiguous by calling Titania a king when Titania shows very clear feminine characteristics. Also, the fraternal twins Alphino and Alize have always been hard to distinguish between, even though one's a boy and the other a girl. While this part isn't too important, it's another situation that is somewhat confusing or complex to help us view the world differently. The main point is that we keep absorbing light wardens, which returns the night sky to each area, but the amount of light we're absorbing becomes concerning. It's so concerning that when we reach our final companion, Y'shtola, in the Raktika Greatwood, she doesn't even recognize us because she's blind, but sees things through their magical aether. Our aether has been changed so much that she believed that we are a sin eater because we absorb so much light. This is surprising to us because it's a change not represented on the outside. Now, the Raktika Greatwood is the one area where darkness exists naturally because of the large canopy of trees. Groups of people worshipping the darkness have taken residence there. They believe that to embrace the darkness, you need to adopt another name, which is why Y'shtola had taken on Matoya's name. This is also around when Emet-Selch introduces himself to us directly.
Wage your war against the Sin Eaters, put each and every Light Warden to the sword, prove yourselves heroes, brave and true, and I will be glad to embrace you as allies. Allies worthy of bearing the burden of truth.
While our party isn't happy with his presence, and there is almost no trust given to his words, there isn't much we can do about it other than continue our quest. But then, while using the body of Emperor Solus as his corporeal vessel, Emet-Selch makes jokes about how nostalgic he is for the Garlean Emperor's conquests, who he takes the form of.
No lands must remain beyond our grasp. Go forth, conquer, rule!
Forgive me. A sudden pang of nostalgia for those halcyon days. Exploring virgin territories, subjugating primitive peoples, all for the glory of Garlemald.
If you've brought your ivory standard, I'll be happy to tell you where to stick it.
What he's hinting at here is more sinister than we can fathom at first. By the time Emperor Solus founded the Garlean Empire, Emet-Selch had already gained control of his body. For him to nonchalantly joke about revealing such a great but terrible feat to us is astounding. The founding of the Garlean Empire is the origin of so much of the conflict we experience in our homeworld, and he says it like it was nothing to him. This not only suggests how many evil deeds he must have done in these thousands of years if he speaks so casually about this one, but it also likens us to him. As the Warrior of Light, we are known for being the brute force to get things done for our allies. And this isn't always pretty, but we justify it with the greater good we hope to achieve. Remember, we are the ones fighting and burning away for our path, and the way Thancred threatens Emet-Selch every time we meet him, Emet-Selch seems to be the more diplomatic one here. So are we the bad guys, or is violence justified? Emet-Selch also has some other redeeming qualities, such as his refusal to lie. He immediately comes out and tells us who he is the first time we meet him.
I am Solus Sos Galvus, founding father of the Garlean Empire, and under various guises, the architect of myriad other imperially inclined nations.
As for my true identity, I am Emet-Selch, Ascian.
Emet-Selch also has a very theatrical personality and always speaks with witty humor, which makes him more likable despite his intentions.
Behold the sky, restored to its former glory. Have you ever seen a more affecting spectacle? Oh, it is truly, deeply infuriating. Do you have any idea how much you have delayed the rejoining?
There are also moments where he stands with our party during the quest dialogue, as if he is one of us. It's the first time we look at the Ascians from this perspective. Emet-Selch may be a villain, but he's a likable villain, and this further confuses our conception of good and evil. Later we go with Y'shtola to uncover and translate a monument within some ruins protected by a group of hostile cultists. Near the monument we see 3 paintings on the wall. Ardbert's ghost appears and tells us that one of the images was from the ancient time of heroes, but looks like someone's attempted to scrape it off the wall. The corresponding theme of the Raktika area is truth and lies. We question the validity of the stories told on the wall and what they mean. This directly reminds me of the allegory of the cave in Plato's The Republic. In it, there are men trapped in a cave facing a wall, only able to see images made by shadows on the wall. This situation is used to represent the average person who does not see the truth of the world. The truth is seen by the philosophers who escape the cave and look directly at the objects illuminated by the sun. His point is that our senses cannot be relied on to interpret the world around us because they're based on the shadows of their true forms. In Shadowbringers, it's easy to see the parallels to Plato's allegory of the cave, with the cave painting and the broader theme of light and darkness. However, the trend so far has been to overturn our expectations. We've been searching for the truth, but in doing so have been confronted with many lies. Another interesting observation is that while we deem the Exarch as good, he lies to us and keeps secrets from us. But Emet-Selch, who is bad, tells the truth. He comes right out of the gates, tells us exactly who he is and what his plans are. Emet-Selch represents the philosopher who knows everything with how long he's lived and how many experiences he's had. If anyone knows the truth, it's him. Yet the story has by now taught us to question our expectations because everything is so different here. More questions will be answered as the story unfolds. While searching for the Light Warden in the Raktika Greatwood, the Eulmore army arrives in search of us. They poison many of the natives in an attempt to get us to surrender. Y'shtola ends up sacrificing herself to save those poisoned by the Eulmore army by jumping off a ledge to catch a bottle of antidote before teleporting herself into the lifestream. Although Emet-Selch refused to help us earlier, he shows up while we're mourning the loss of our comrade, and using his powers of creation, he finds and returns Y'shtola back to us from the lifestream. We're not really sure why he's helping us now, but we're relieved to have our ally back. We carry on to defeat the Light Warden of Raktika and find more cave paintings. Emet-Selch reveals to us the story of these images. He claims that the being depicted by darkness is Zodiark, who was summoned to save the world, but Hydaelyn, who is depicted by light, triumphed over Zodiark, which sundered the world into 13 different shards. Emet-Selch then reveals that Hydaelyn and Zodiark are the eldest and most powerful of primals. This overturns our entire notion that the primals and Ascians are necessarily bad. Since the Warrior of Light is Hydaelyn's champion, we question whether we are of free will or tempered under the will of a primal, as most other primals tend to do that. The realization also puts us on the same level as the Ascians because we are both followers of a primal.
For our world, for our people, for all creation to be made whole again. Wouldn't you wish for the same?
Because of all the different conflicts we've faced, the expectations of binary oppositions such as truth and lies that have been mixed up, and the willingness of Emet-Selch to help us, we feel some empathy for him for the first time. We have the same motives, it's just a shame that they can't coexist in the same world. We return to Eulmore with our companions to confront Vothri, who is the final Light Warden, but he flies away and we must chase him to the top of Mount Gulg by creating the biggest golem ever. There are plenty of biblical references to the encounter with Vothri, such as text description asking, "Will man live a waking dream in paradise, or a painful existence in a harsh reality?" These of course are references to the sacrificial cross and the fall of man. So by defeating Vothri, who is named after Innocence, we're accepting sin, we are vanquishing light, and we are dethroning a leader.
But conquest is the easy part. The true challenge begins once the dust has settled, quenching the glowing embers of animosity and maintaining a semblance of peace. This requires the conqueror to treat the conquered with dignity, and the conquered to let bygones be bygones, a difficult feat to achieve.
Here, Emet-Selch suggests the solution to our final conflict of ideas, that of war and peace. While war and conflict may seem necessary in order to dethrone an unjust leader, it's the feelings of spite and disrespect that may linger for hundreds or thousands of years later that are the most difficult to balance. And when we put this into perspective of the fall of man and the Shadowbringers story, we compare Emet-Selch to Vothri. Vothri claims to be innocent and forces peace by total control over his subjects, and Emet-Selch wages war and chaos openly for his own benefit. Both seem to be bad, so the difficulty is finding that balance between sin and innocence, war and peace. We need to fight for what's right instead of hesitating in fear that we may break the rules, but also temper ourselves, otherwise we may become the original sin that we were fighting against. Here the Exarch makes his big reveal that he planned to steal all the light from us, use his summoning spell to teleport out into the emptiness of space, and die there where the light will no longer be able to return to this world. His plan is to sacrifice himself to restore the balance and to prevent the calamity on the source. Then a gust of wind unveils the Exarch's cowl and reveals that it's Raktika, who we left to control the Crystal Tower back in A Realm Reborn. There's a clear comparison between our actions and those of the Ascians. We took on the risk of absorbing the imbalance of light at the risk of our life, and Raktika wants to ensure that there is no risk in saving this world, but in doing so ensures his death. It is the ultimate sacrifice, and arguably more powerful than the summoning of Zodiark, because it only requires one sacrifice. However, Emet-Selch appears out of the shadows and shoots the Exarch with a gun. This is shocking in so many ways. We were so close to the finish line, and now our plan is foiled. Also, Emet-Selch broke his passive streak by attacking us for the first time. Even further, he used a gun, which we haven't seen anyone use in this world yet. It's all magic and swords until this moment. All this time we've been building up a comfort with and a liking for Emet-Selch, but at this moment it's all ruined. He is after all the villain, and he's been watching us all this time to understand our plans. Emet-Selch was so confident that his plan would succeed that he watched us as we continued to remove the light that he needed for his plan. Then he snatches it from us right as we have some hope for survival. He tells us that we're doomed, snags the Exarch to take his knowledge, and invites us to meet him in the Tempest when we fully become a Sin Eater. The Tempest is an underwater area that has a giant air pocket around it. The place being called the Tempest is a clear reference to the Shakespearean play of the same name, with characters from that play such as Trinculo or Caliban directly referenced as places of interest in this final area. Other than a fitting depiction of Emet-Selch's consciousness, which is clearly filled with tons of knowledge of literature and other topics he learned over thousands of years, this reference conjures the theme of nature versus nurture again. In Shakespeare's play, a father tries to teach his daughter how he wishes her to grow up to be. A king is almost overthrown, and a slave wishes to be free. The conflict of all these scenarios is between nature and nurture. They question how much the past should determine the future. Should a father decide how a daughter should act, or should she decide herself? Should lineage decide who rules, or should people vote for their leader? Should a poor man be enslaved in exchange for food and shelter, or should they be treated as someone capable of using their money and be given fair pay for their work? In Shadowbringers, these conflicts are also presented to us throughout the expansion. There are the slaves in Eulmore, Thancred's relationship with Minfilia's reincarnation, and Amrat within the Tempest. Amrat is Emet-Selch's recreation of his home so long ago before the planets were sundered. Using a vast amount of Aether magic, he created a ghost city in the likeness of his people. However, this is merely a project he uses to keep from going bored, and not the actual home he wishes to return to. While in Amrat, we meet one of Emet-Selch's recreations, Hythlodaeus, who tells us more about the final days and the sacrifices his people made. They call us their new old friend and tell us about the convocation of 14 council members who made the decisions back then. Some of the council disagreed with the plan to sacrifice their people to Zodiark. Emet-Selch was one of those who believed in sacrificing more to Zodiark.
You think us the same? You think your tattered soul of equal worth to those I lost? Let us imagine that the laws of reality are again undone and the world faces true annihilation. Do you honestly believe that half your number would sacrifice themselves to save the other? Of course they wouldn't! You cannot be entrusted with our legacy.
I will bring back our brethren, our friends, our loved ones.
The world belongs to us and us alone.
This is the true conflict of Shadowbringers, nature versus nurture, light versus dark. Should the shadows of the past decide how things should be based on how they used to be, or should the people of the future decide how things should be based on the light that they see? If you've been paying attention at all, you'll know that both are wrong. It's balance that is required. We need to use the past to inform the future, but do what we can and not dwell on things we can't change. The simulacrum of Hythlodaeus gives us a memory of the past. It suggests that not only were we one of the souls of the Ascians that had been split by the Sundering, but that everyone is. This is confusing or unclear for now, but one thing that is for sure is that we want to save our friend Raktika from Emet-Selch. We confront Emet-Selch in his lair within Amarat, but he's too strong for us and our allies. When all seems lost, the Warrior of Darkness, Ardbert, merges his soul with ours, and we use the memory of Hythlodaeus, which reveals our true form as an Ascian. This is the first time we see Emet-Selch scared, because something occurs that he did not expect, that he did not know despite his vast knowledge.
That trick of the light! You are a broken husk, nothing more. How can you hope to stand against me alone?
We stand together! Champions from beyond the rift, heed my call!
The irony is that without his recreation of Amarat, which included Hythlodaeus, we may never have been able to fight Emet-Selch. Thus, his own pride and nostalgia was his downfall. We defeat his true form, which is aptly named Hades, and capture his soul in White Orosite, so he can't transfer bodies again. The last thing Emet-Selch says is, "Remember that we once lived," as his enchantment ends and his memory of Amarat fades away. Shadowbringers is the assertion that there is a lot more to this world than we know or can even imagine to know, but that we don't need to go that far. Even though Emet-Selch thought he knew everything, he essentially ends up losing to the power of friendship. Through all the different character stories we experience, we learn that good and evil aren't so clear, that we shouldn't strive for perfection if it means living in fear of sin, that we shouldn't give up hope because life can be found in unexpected places, and that even if we may be living in a cave lying to us about the objects we see, those shadows still have some depth to them. All of these conflicts we learn from had been composed by Emet-Selch in his quest to return home. This is why Emet-Selch is such a great villain. His plight causes us to question whether he was right, whether we are the bad guys, and whether we have the right to continue existing. Of course, there is a balance that must be achieved, but it sometimes requires reaching into the depths of darkness to truly appreciate what we have or to find that balance. Emet-Selch teaches us about ourselves and how we can let go of those ideals and expectations we once had. It's necessary to find that balance between what keeps us alive and what gives us a reason to keep living. We do what we must to survive, because at the end of the day, we all just want to return home. But this is not the end of Emet-Selch. In the later patches of Shadowbringers, we learn that another Ascian by the name of Elidibus was the one who manipulated Ardbert into bringing imbalance to the first. With Emet-Selch out of the way, Elidibus attempts to fix their plan in this world by converting more people to believe they are warriors of light. He takes over the Crystal Tower and uses it to summon all of these warriors of light, convincing them that it is their duty to stop us, the Warrior of Darkness. After reaching the Crystal Tower with Raktika, we confront Elidibus, who has become a super warrior of light. Once again, we rely on the memories of the past from the chip given to us by Hythlodaeus to help us, which reveals that our soul was one of the members of the Ascian Convocation of 14. It also conjures up an old friend. The memory of Emet-Selch actually serves us from our imprisonment in the Ascian realm. We can tell that the indistinct Ascian character model is Emet-Selch because of the familiar hand gestures. So in the end, he becomes our ally. The final expectation has been shattered. Good is not just good, and evil is not just evil. Sometimes we become allies with those who we once disagreed with, and other times we need to compromise for the greater good. This is such a fundamental reality of life that we often forget because we get caught up in our ideals, our pride, and our assumption that we know everything. Final Fantasy XIV has some of the most meaningful and memorable characters, so when I say that Shadowbringers has the most meaningful villain, it's quite high praise. If you think about it, following Grahatia's plan to sacrifice himself would have saved the world, but would have ended with us losing a dear friend. So Emet-Selch saved him by foiling our plans. In the end, a balance of light and darkness is what creates the best outcomes. But I'm sure I'm not the only one who felt this way. If you felt otherwise or wanted to contribute in some other way to the discussion, leave a comment. And if you like this content, please like the video and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.